Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back to the Islamic Perspectives show. We sincerely apologize for the technical difficulties. With every new project, we have new challenges, and every week, actually, we come up with something new. Today, we hope, inshallah, we make up for this delay in beginning, and we start by a couple of verses from the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Mu'minun says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات واعملوا صالحا إني بما تعملون عليم وإن هذه أمتكم أمة واحدة وأنا ربكم فاتقون صدق الله العظيم. O messengers, eat from what is good and lawful and act righteously. Indeed, I fully know what you do. Surely this religion of yours is only one, and I am your Lord, so fear me alone. We choose to start with these verses from the Holy Quran because it follows the theme that we have for this month, the theme of one ummah, following the theme of last year in the shade of the Quran. And it flows well really with what we chose as a title for this series, Islamic Perspectives. And it actually is quite interesting to have the theme and the show weave into our guest today, Dr. Ahmed Abdimajid, who is a philosophy professor, and we'll introduce him in a few minutes. But the idea of actually explaining what does it mean to have an Islamic worldview, or to view things, or to view the world through an Islamic lens, is actually a subject of contemplation and more studies in the philosophy field. And the philosophy field for many might be quite abstract or far from, and we hope Dr. Ahmed today will be able to connect the dots and bring it closer to our day-to-day realities. We also hope to actually connect these true meanings, these deeper meanings, and these intellectual contributions of scholars to give us also a deeper meaning in our reflections and in our worship in this blessed month of Ramadan. Today I am hosting this show again with my colleague Maimouna Hussein, who is also on the board of the Muslim Association of Canada. And I'm really honored and privileged to be with her today and have these weekly discussions and with esteemed guests and scholars. So I'll pass it on to you, Maimouna.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace, blessings, and mercy of Allah be with you. As we enter the third week of Ramadan, alhamdulillah, as Khalid said, we are really excited to be here with you in our weekly show, Islamic Perspectives. I do want to start with the land acknowledgement. So we are here in Mississauga tonight, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe-Chippewa people, the land that is home to the Métis, Inuit, and other indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. I also welcome you to these programs that the Muslim Association of Canada has been running through the month of Ramadan, as Khalid was saying, on this concept of one ummah. And, you know, MAC as an organization really focuses on providing spaces and services and programs that are holistic in education and focused on personal development for Muslims in Canada. And so, you know, shows like this really focus on bringing ideas and thoughts on building and strengthening our communities, our families, our neighborhoods, and really celebrating these concepts of Islam and how we really live this in our lives in every sphere of life. So as Khalid was saying, we're really excited to have Dr. Abdimajid here with us. This will be an interactive discussion. So, you know, as you hear him, we will ask him some questions, but we also invite you to ask your questions, and you can type them into the YouTube channel, and inshallah we'll try to get through to them as we go through the show, inshallah. So with that, I think what I also want to touch on is, as Khalid was saying, this concept of one ummah. I want to reflect on a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said that you know, the parable of the believers in their affection, their mercy and compassion for each other is like that of a single body. And when any limb aches, the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever. And this is a Sahih hadith in Sahih Muslim. And so this concept that, we actually feel each other's pain, we feel each other's joys as well, and we come together through this belief as one ummah. And we invite you through all our programs through this month of Ramadan to really reflect on this concept of one ummah as you read the Quran that was revealed through the month of Quran, through the month of Ramadan, as you, through every aspect of your worship through these last few weeks of Ramadan. We invite you to really focus on this one ummah concept and this one message concept. So with that, I think what we'll do is, inshallah, we'll get started with the program and invite Dr. Abdimajid. And Khalid, if you can tell us a little bit about Dr. Abdimajid.
Okay, so Dr. Abdimajid has a special place in my heart. I don't want to make both of us old, but I know him over 20 years ago. We studied at the same university in the American University in Cairo, but he fast-tracked and he completed his master's and PhD from the Department of Philosophy at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and then he taught, he was an assistant professor of religion at Syracuse University in New York, and then he currently is teaching at, he's an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy at Boğaziçi University in Turkey. Dr. Abdimajid's contribution, intellectual contribution, are actually numerous and actually very important and relevant to us as Muslims in North America. His areas of specialization include the history of philosophy and philosophy of religion, with a special focus on the late 18th, 19th, and early 20th century German philosophy, as well as Islamic philosophy, theology, and mysticism. He has significantly contributed to the Princeton Encyclopedia of Islamic Political Thought, and has also contributed to other books and articles on Islamic philosophy and political realism. He has received multiple awards and honors, including the Fund of Innovative Teaching Award from Emory University in 2011. We've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Ahmed over the past year and a half on actually multiple online learning courses to really bring the study of Islamic philosophy and the study of philosophy in general to the people in general, and to basically apply and extend this knowledge and this understanding of these ideas into our day-to-day lives, and understand why and where are we heading. So I invite you all actually to watch the Dr. Abdimajid series on Islamic philosophy on the Mac e-learning platform, elearning.macnet.ca, and he has contributed several courses there. And without further delay, I would like to invite Dr. Abdimajid to be part of it.
Hi. Hello? Hello?
Can you hear us, Dr. Ahmed?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. So I welcome you again to the show, and we're happy to have you and to host you here with us in. And we want to start our conversation, and actually we will try to compress it because we lost time with these technical difficulties. And interestingly, in the discussion we had before the show, you wanted us to use the term Weltanschauung and as an alternative. Yes, Weltanschauung. I will leave you to pronounce it as an alternative to worldview. So what does a worldview? You chose even worldview as a better alternative to perspectives. So let's start there. Why did you choose this title, and why is it important?
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you and with the Muslim community in Canada and North America at large. Can you hear me? I suddenly lost track of the sound. Okay, so I'll just continue. So the word Weltanschauung is a German word, but it has become accepted in the English in the English language lexicon for the human sciences, and as a term for worldview. And it goes back to the 19th century. One of the key figures who talked about it was the founder of the term Geisteswissenschaften, or human sciences, namely Wilhelm Delty. And he meant by it a number of things, but one major aspect of a worldview is the intellectual and affective, that is, emotional and aesthetic dimensions of the frame through which we interpret um, certain things within society on the human level, which is very different from the way in which we explain things in a narrow way in, say, scientific experiments and so on. So a worldview in a nutshell is, I don't want to use the word perspective because perspective is very limited, but it captures what many thinkers have talked about as a general set of commitments that are shared by a specific group of people, or characterizing a particular way of thinking, and that we use it to interpret different phenomena that we encounter in the world on a very human level. Now, of course, out of this you can build scientific theories and stuff like this. And but interestingly, in the last 50 years or so, discussions of worldviews has become rather notorious in human sciences, and there is a certain aversion towards this. And the reason is there is a general acceptance or supposition from the 1960s and 70s or onwards, that everything is morally relative and everything is historically constructed, and hence you cannot talk about a specific worldview. While I think there is some truth to that critique of these of that position on worldviews, and again, this is not to say that that the idea of worldview started in 19th century. You are going to find it in people like Ibn Khaldun, for instance. But to give credit to postmodern thinkers or contemporary thinkers from the 1960s and 70s, while they do have some point in saying, oh, everything is relative and you cannot talk about a coherent perspective here and there. But I think that experience have shown, and maybe later I can talk about this, that no, there are certain characteristics that you can point out in different domains of that you can characterize as ways of thinking and ways of existence, and you can say, okay, we can talk about some kind that or some sort of an Islamic Weltanschauung or worldview here and there. Despite the diversity of Muslim communities and despite the diversity of their localities geographically and environmentally and so on and so forth. So and I think that, as I said, I think that that position on radical moral relativism and historical constructivism is being more or less challenged nowadays, historically and politically and sociologically as well. But we can talk about that later. So this is why I chose the word as a word worldview, because I think it is it's the most expressive of the theme that you asked me to talk about, which is at-tasawwur. If there is anything that we can call a shared foundational Islamic perspective that was developed from the beginning of Islam as a way of thinking. Again, I'm talking as a philosopher, so forgive me, as a way of thinking and as a way of living, versus other modes of thinking and modes of rational interpretation of phenomena. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for this intro. Just to bring it down to the day-to-day, the average Muslim on a day-to-day level. So, and before getting into the details of what composes an Islamic worldview, what's the difference between really a Muslim who does his own rituals, prays, fasts, and lives his life, and a Muslim who is conscious about actually living through an Islamic lens or an Islamic worldview. What's the difference really at the core level?
Okay. Well, that's a great question. Well, I would say that you are describing the crisis that many Muslim communities, whether in diaspora or in Muslim majority countries, are facing, which is that, let me borrow a term from Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous French philosopher. We are living in a truncated world in a certain way. So people have certain practices and they relate to certain to a very long and lengthy tradition, and I'll give examples in a second. And they are doing these practices maybe out of emotional perspectives, or maybe because they were born as such. But at the same time, they cannot see its relevance to their day-to-day life, nor they can relate it to the world they are living in, nor they can be critical about it, which is very important. And more importantly, nor can they bring it to contribute to the reality in which they are living in. So by the truncated, I mean that people practice and maintain certain sets of beliefs that they do not know their origin, they do not know their practice. Sorry, they just practice the end result of them. Okay. So let me give an example, as I said. Let's take, for instance, belief, aqidah, which is a foundation of Islam. Okay? If you open any book of aqidah, the main position of all Sunni scholars is that faith is only accepted based on another al-aqli, rational consideration. Now, of course, some people say these guys or those big Muslim philosophical theologians or mutakallimun were talking about a very basic level of rational thinking. But again, that idea that was pervasive in Muslim cultures across the vast land that Islam uh, inhabited and created a very interesting modes of living and artistic expressions and poetic expressions and so on, made rationality, which is highly stressed in the Quran, and rational thinking very central to the issue of faith. Now that is no longer the case. So here is one example for you. Now, another example, of course, is that the rational commitments that those mutakallimun developed as basis for a rational belief in God did affect heavily the way in which they drove the opinions or fatwa from the ahkam in the Quran, which define the do's and not do's and the legal and ethical aspects of day-to-day Muslim life, since you want to talk about the everyday level. Okay, so it does affect the everyday life, but the problem is that when you have a truncated position, that is, you do not know these foundations, that worldview, you are practicing these things, and you do not realize in why and in what way that speaks or perhaps offers a very brilliant perspective on maybe an aesthetic or moral or social or political crisis that you are living in the year 2020, that and just by following an opinion that would develop by a Maliki or Shafi'i or Hanafi scholar sometime in the 17th or maybe 15th or the 14th century. So this is precisely the point. The point is that the worldview is the rational foundations, okay, which are very elaborate and very complex, of the way Muslims develop the religion as a rational way of inhabiting the world and dwelling in the world. And by dwelling, I mean on every level: aesthetic, moral, social, political, and so on.
So, Dr. Abdimajid, I want to ask you, this rational grounding you're talking about through this
Yeah.
worldview, within the Islamic identity over centuries, there's been so much diversity intellectually, socially. We're so complex, So, what are some of the general kind of overviews of an Islamic worldview that kind of guides all of us despite all of this diversity?
Another great question. Well, I'm not sure if I can summarize them all, but I can talk about my own impression about them.
Yes.
Again, at the risk of being heavily criticized by fellow scholars, whether in Islamic studies or in the field of Islamic philosophy. But I'll talk about my own impressions, particularly as someone who came to the study of Islamic philosophy after studying and getting trained in the German philosophical tradition and the European Enlightenment tradition in particular. So I want to talk about two distinctive features. One that connects with the theoretical or scientific aspects of thinking, and also legal aspects of thinking, and the other one that connects with, and I have published on both of them, and the other one is on the that connects more with the issues of gender and aesthetics and social reality in Islamic, as far as that Islamic worldview is concerned. Now, the first one, the first distinctive feature of that worldview is a commitment to rational pluralism. What do I mean by that? And why is that very sort of distinctive? One big problem, if we, again, following a rather Western-centric reading of the history of philosophy or the history of ideas, assuming that if we are going to start with a study of rational systems of thinking, we are going to go to the Greeks. Again, assuming that the Greeks were European, which is another colonial delusion, but, but leaving that aside, because the Greeks were really closer to the Eastern civilizations in Asia and Africa, like the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Mesopotamians, than they were to anything in Europe. But assuming that that is the case, one big problem in the entire history of rational thinking is the relationship between universal ideas and particularities of sense data. For instance, this is something that philosophers have always talked about. Like, for instance, the relationship between concepts, like the concept of a desk, for instance. The concept of a desk is very simple, is that it's an object with pillars and a seat and a back, and its purpose is to seat humans. And the big diversity of chairs, the infinite number of possible chairs that materiality affords us. So the question that that occupied philosophers is that in order to produce knowledge, whether systems of knowledge, whether physical sciences or logic or even art, you have to use concepts. But to what extent do these concepts, with their basic definitions, capture the diversity of the material world? Now, that might seem as a very abstract concept, but when you actually extend it to social and political issues, you get infinite numbers of cans of worms. Let's take politics, for instance. Okay, like if is there one absolute concept of justice? If that is so, then that might be an argument for totalitarianism and authoritarianism. Okay, is there one absolute concept of the good that we can apply to each and every situation or not? And so on and so forth. So that troubled relation between forms on universals on one side and material diversity on the other side has been a huge, if not one of the central problems throughout the history of rational systems of thought, and hence worldviews. Now, one thing that I find very distinctive in the history of Islamic thinking, despite the diversity that you very well pointed out, stretching from Asia to Andalusia in the West, is that there was a commitment to rational diversity. That there was an understanding that there will always be a mediation between concepts or rational ideals and the material reality in which we are living, and that this mediation will happen through different systems which Muslims brilliantly developed. I'm going to hint to that in 1 second, of mediating that. So, for instance, when you get to Islamic law, for instance, okay, you find that you can easily understand the relation, the difference between the Islamic schools across geographical localities, okay, as systems of reason that accommodate, okay, the material reality in which people were living and the commitments that everyone share on a rational level, like, say, for instance, the commitment to justice, the basic principles of morality that every rational being shares, like don't kill another human being, for instance. Murder is bad. And they use the same methods, but due to the difference of the material conditions, say in India versus in Egypt, a Hanafi scholar belonging to the same school would give a different judgment. That is something, for instance, that is not afforded by the rational worldview that underlies the system of modern theories of constitution. The assumption that most 17th century thinkers made in political philosophy was that there is a single universal truth, and that has to be, to use the language of trickle down, which is one of the favorite terms of Republican politicians in the U.S. And it has to be trickled down in a linear way to the people. It has to be applied in a systematic way without any, and hence nowadays, and particularly not nowadays, in the last 30 or 40 years, all of the civil society movements calling for pushing against state dominion and so on and so forth has been trying to break away from the dominion of that powerful state, which is based on the constitution and supposedly applies in that. If you allow me one
Dr.
more
Ahmed, I
minute,
want to
the
take
same
this
holds for
point.
science.
I want to
Okay, I
take this
just want to
point.
add one thing. Okay,
Okay.
please.
The point
No, no, go
about
ahead, please.
thank you. The point about practical application that you're talking about, I want to kind of come down to this point. You're giving us a lot to kind of, how to kind of construct and think about, this Islamic worldview, or Weltanschauung, as you're saying. And then when you're talking, when you talk about the practical application, how can we manifest this worldview or Weltanschauung within our daily lives? Can you give us some practical aspects of this to any, the average Muslim here in Canada or any part of the world?
Well, I'm not sure if I have a direct answer to this. I think one major. Let me talk about the other aspect of the other dimension that I mentioned. So I mentioned one
Okay.
aspect of it, which, as I said, is related to theoretical concerns like in legal and political philosophy and in science. I didn't talk about the scientific part, but we can leave it till sometime later. And the logical part, because it's so much fun to talk about how Muslims develop brilliant systems of model thinking and logic to deal with, which are, by the way, now very prominent in contemporary philosophy of science, by the way. Let's look at the other aspect because it may relate to your kind question. And I will try to respond to your kind question at the end. The other aspect of the Islamic worldview that I want to talk about is the celebration of materiality over abstract rationality, which is fascinating, truly, because most worldviews before Islam didn't, at least in the Mediterranean region, from the Greeks and the reception of the Greeks by the early Christian fathers, they didn't do that. And that, for instance, had incredible influences on the way in which Muslim aesthetics developed. Like, look, for instance, the way in which Islamic art dealt with matter and how it respected the crudeness of matter, and hence it was always opposed to the imposition of human forms on matter. Okay, it only accepted geometrical forms that express proportionality, for instance. The same thing has to do with the body. Okay, there was a deep respect for the body from the very beginning, and that led to a position that celebrates femininity and the feminine body and so on and so forth, and sexuality and gender philosophy. You find that brilliantly manifested in the work of someone like Ibn Arabi, for instance. So back to your question, if that is manifested in aesthetics and but unfortunately is not practiced, how can we restore it back? Well, the answer relates to what Khalid said, that we are working on in that project of education. Is that you have first of all there are a number of steps. First of all, we have to understand um, the Weltanschauung, or the worldview in which we are all born into, and that is the leftovers of the Enlightenment, if I may put it like that, in the age of postmodernity, because the project of modernity ended one way or another, and we are now living in a moment of confusion, the way I see it. So we have to understand the elements of the Weltanschauung in which we are living, the rational commitments or the critiques of the rational commitments, because now we are living in a very strange age where rationality is becoming more and more a problem, and particularly in Western academia nowadays. Hence, there are huge attacks on many of the figures that I mentioned in my, and that I spent big part of my life studying. Okay, people like Kant and so on and so forth. So this is one thing. So we have first of all to understand the reality. I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a philosopher, but at least in schools we have to include and this is something that is unfortunately not happening. People have to understand, for instance, when they are studying basic science, biology or chemistry or physics, that there are certain rational commitments that are foundational to the way these sciences were formed in the last 400 years. When they are studying political science, they have to understand that. And unfortunately, modern academia and modern schools are going in the exact opposite direction, when they no longer ask questions about the foundations or make students think about questions of foundations, as much as they try to channel them into pragmatic concerns. So this is the first step. The second step is that we have to restore or unravel these. I talked about two of these characteristics, assuming that I'm right about them in the first place. Okay, we need to realize the relevance to the current situation and bring the relevance not only to ourselves but to our fellow members of the society, just like um fellow Protestant liberals from the 18th century has been spreading a worldview under the name or under the rubric of enlightenment, okay, and the age of reason and belief in science and so on and so forth. From the 18th century, they had a certain perspective, and they had very good justifications for that perspective, and they managed to spread it. Now that perspective is falling apart, and if we want to contribute, we have to make that view relevant, but that will take a lot of effort. So a first step of it is to, first of all, to realize that Islam is not only a set of practices, but that there is that Weltanschauung, and that Weltanschauung can be only made relevant by understanding critically the foundations of the worldview in which we are born into and in which we exist and practice and breathe and deal with in every aspect of our lives. Okay? Without much reflection, and then we can articulate the Islamic worldview based on a very careful analysis of the rational commitments of Islamic theology and law, like the aspects I showed you, which are shared among all of these schools, despite the diversity and so on. And then we can show, okay, that can say something to X problem in our scientific way of thinking. And only then, when the truncated mode of existence of Muslims in the contemporary world, whether in Muslim majority, because to be frank with you, there isn't much difference. As a matter of fact, I think actually Muslims in the West, having lived in Muslim majority countries and in North America for years, I don't think there is much difference. People are living in that truncated. I think it's actually worse in Muslim majority countries because people assume that they have some kind of authenticity or something, which is completely hocus pocus from my humble perspective. I think it is a purely dogmatic assumption. Okay, and that's it. So this is why we need to dig to make that realization first. It's sort of an existential moment of suspending our assumptions, our natural assumptions, realizing that there was that worldview that took centuries to emerge as a consistent rational framework, just like we can talk about enlightenment as a Protestant liberal project that started cooking in the late 16th century and emerged in a very systematic way in the 18th and 19th century, and then was spread to the world through colonialism and okay over the 19th and 20th. Okay, so this is what we have to realize.
Thank you.
So
Thank
that's
you,
my
Dr. Ahmed.
answer to your question. So there are 3 steps,
Dr.
but
Ahmed,
we
you gave
have
us
to
in
be
this.
intellectually active.
Dr.
That's
Ahmed, you
my
gave us
point.
in. I don't. Can you hear me, Dr. Ahmed?
Yes.
Yes. I want to thank you really for bringing these pieces together, and really most interesting for me in this discussion that the way you explained actually how we interact with our religion, with Islam in general, and that's as you said, independent of the context. But actually, it's a problem over the past while. One, you mentioned basically an emotional relationship with this religion, and it's an emotional that is taken away from reason or rational thinking. The next thing you mentioned also around also how you briefly also mentioned that for a good portion of our history now, the way we approach Islam, we approach it mostly from a legal perspective. What is right, what is wrong, what is halal, what is haram. And it is basically a very one layer of this complete system or complete way of life. And interestingly, you're leading us actually to think of how we should really approach and think about these things differently. And what remains, if you can also, I know this discussion can take a very long time, and we hope to continue it in further discussions. But what I want to really, that is very relevant, want to ask about that is very relevant to our day-to-day lives here in general, is the idea that we also treat Islam in a very transactional way. We use Islam for packaged benefit, spiritual benefits here. Even in the way we deal with the hereafter is also more transactional. How many I get versus how many I lose, or how many I do good versus. So this transactional approach also is also problematic. Is this in any way related to how you called it, we live in a different system and worldview. Is this anyhow related, and how can we break from neither the emotional, the logical, or the legal, or even the transactional relationship?
Yes, I agree with you that all of these are manifestations of what I call the truncated mode of being, if I may use a term that existentialists like Heidegger. And okay, okay, this is a mode of being of that they are trunk. So, if you look, for instance, at many Muslims nowadays, people talk about Islamophobia. People talk about certain practices and so on and so forth. Whether but what Muslims haven't been doing for the last 100 years or more than that, for 200 years, is making an intellectual effort to make that those elements of that Weltanschauung, which I believe actually does exist and is a very rich Weltanschauung, okay, relevant to contemporary problems, okay. And this is why we cannot have serious conversations on a foundational level. And hence, back to your very kind question, this is why you are left with emotive relations with the religion, or as you put it very nicely, transactional relations, okay, with the religion, okay, like what can I do in order to get X and Y and Z hasanat, or rewards in order to secure some position in the hereafter or something. The real missing and a dimension of intellectual activity in the last 100 and 150 years, because if you look at even intellectual, so-called intellectual discourse that was produced in different parts of the Muslim world throughout from the late 19th century to the late 20th century, it was always either emotive, by crying through weeping and lamenting the loss of a glorious past, okay, or in the form of ideological reactions, or attempts to solve particular legal or specific aspects here and there. But there was not, even though there were many thinkers who touched on the importance of the Weltanschauung, nobody really went, because it takes a lot to do it. And this is the homework, for instance, since I use postmodern liberal tradition, which produced the Enlightenment movement and the so-called modernity. These guys did their homework. Okay, they sat down and they produced foundational works in the 18th, and now Muslims did that brilliantly for over 800 years, starting from the late 7th century, immediately after the death of the Prophet, blessings and peace be upon him, okay, through I would say through the 18th century. You had people doing incredible advancements and thinking from that broad perspective. So yes, you are absolutely right. I mean, that transactional perspective and that emotive perspective is very dominant, because the intellectual dimension is not even there on the radar of any everyday Muslim, whether in Muslim majority countries or in Muslim minority countries, if I may put it. Okay, it's
So
not
what you're
even
really
there. It's not part of the consensus.
So what you're really saying is that, I mean, we really need to kind of connect back to some of the work that traditionally Muslim historians have done, and it's time for us to really kind of connect back and connect these dots and start questioning the foundations of what we're learning today and living today. I think this is really, this gives us some good practical advice in terms of, you've given us a lot of good foundational thoughts. What we want to do now is remind our viewers that we are welcoming questions for Dr. Abdimajid. Dr. Abdimajid, we really appreciate, we know it's past midnight where
Thank you.
you are tonight.
No, it's fine.
So
I am happy.
Jazakallah khair. So I think we will take a short pause at this time, and we will come back and we will look at a few questions with you, Dr. Abdimajid.
Okay, sure.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are proud to announce the near completion of our biggest project of the year, our OGS backyard transformation into a state-of-the-art track and soccer field. Alhamdulillah. Despite the challenges of COVID, we pushed ahead to complete this project as promised. After years of planning, proposals, and months spent under construction, we are finally seeing the result of our hard work, perseverance, and patience. The field is almost complete and is needed more than ever before for our students and community in a post-COVID world for the betterment of their mental and physical well-being. But we need the financial support of our community, people like you, to pay off the outstanding balance for this project. And hence we are presenting a great sponsorship opportunity to our local businesses, community helpers, and organizations. Choose from our extensive sponsorship package that fits your needs and have your businesses advertised on our impressive field or basketball court. This is an amazing opportunity to promote your organization while giving back to the community. What do you need to be a sponsor? Simply visit our website at olivegroveschool.ca to learn about our different packages and fill out our online application form to express interest. We will pre-screen the applicants before approving their sponsorship. Next, choose your desired package and make the annual payment to have your business name advertised to an extensive audience. The school facility is not only used for full-time elementary, middle, and high school, but also weekend schools, camps, sports teams, and community events. Be part of this one-of-a-kind project and promote your business at the same time. Visit our website at olivegroveschool.ca for sponsorship information today.
Okay, we're back, and we're back with Dr. Abdimajid. We really want to take this opportunity to thank him for sharing this evening with us and enlighten us, and not in the modern definition, actually in, in an Islamic definition of enlightenment, and brightening our evening here right before iftar. Due to the technical difficulties, we shifted the time, and we're getting into our next program, the pre-iftar daily show, and I actually I'm sure we'll have quite interesting questions from our audience. But I actually want to give them a chance throughout this week to collect these questions and engage, and we hope Dr. Abdimajid will agree to a follow-up session and a follow-up discussion we have with him at a later time. So we'll collect these, but I really encourage them to get and actually watch this in depth at the e-learning platform, elearning.macnet.ca. And if there is any course, Dr. Abdimajid, we would like our audience who heard about this for the first time to start with and build on. What do you advise? Where do you start our Islamic philosophy 101?
Well, I would, as I said, I don't want people to think that I was just saying that what we need, because is to go back to the vast and very diverse rational tradition of Islam. What we need is a critical reading of and that critical reading will not happen unless we have a critical understanding of our own situation. So if you are asking me to make recommendations about the classes that I had the honor of doing with Mac, I would say start with the Intro to Philosophy class, because there I try to articulate the problems central to rational thinking in general, and then I try to show what was distinctive about the Islamic rational tradition. And usually when I use the word Islamic philosophy, I try to expand it because there is a big bias in scholarship. Usually, when people use the word Islamic philosophy, at least in modern academia, they mean by it like 6 or 7 figures. The guys who like Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Kindi and Farabi. And I mean, of course, I hold these guys in the highest esteem, but Islamic philosophy is way bigger because these guys were a product of very in-depth conversation in Islamic philosophical theology or kalam, which actually continued to be the home of philosophy after the death of that category or group called falasifa in the history of Islam up till around the 13th century, and then it continued in Islamic philosophical theology through the 18th century. And then you also have usul al-fiqh is the principles of Islamic law. There are huge philosophical discussions in all of that. And you also have philosophical mysticism or philosophical Sufism, at-tasawwuf al-mutafalsif, which was also a great tradition. So as I said, I think there are key elements that you find binding the Weltanschauung among all of these foundational fields, if I may put it like that. But we will only be able to discover them. This is my point, and this is why I pointed to that course. When we understand where we are, this is the only way that we can really appreciate in what way that Weltanschauung or the elements of that Weltanschauung or worldview are relevant and can be made useful to us as Muslims and to others in a moment of real crisis and intellectual transformation that we are living in.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. And he also missed saying he has a whole series on contemporary issues with his critical approach as well. And I believe especially the series on contemporary issues might be the subject of another show we have with Dr. Ahmed. We also have other discussions on education and also a critical approach to modern education as well. We have several interesting subjects, and he would be an expert that we hope to continue these conversations with. We really thank him for his time, and we hope to connect with him again. I'll pass it to Maimuna to close. So thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. So I want to actually quickly talk a little bit about a few things that are happening around the cities across Canada and some programs that are coming up. So one thing is we've just started some vaccine clinics here in the Mississauga and Toronto area. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Khalid, because I know you've been involved?
Okay. Yes, so our team at the institutions department at MAC basically for the past few months we're working with public health, local public health units and submitting applications for our MAC centers to be used. We have lots of space and volunteers to be used as mobile pop-up vaccination clinics, and successfully with Peel Public Health and Government of Ontario, we were able to launch the first one today at the ICCO, MAC ICCO. They will today we launched the registration, and interestingly, it closed off the 7,000 spots in a couple of hours, showing basically that people are interested in keeping this country safe, and people that keeping their communities safe as well. So the vaccination starts actually on the 11th, on the 30th, and ends on the 11th of May. And we hope to basically benefit from this experience and replicate it in other cities and in other localities. And we hope also to support other mosques and faith-based centers to help them open mobile clinics as well.
Thank you. So to stay updated on these types of initiatives, we encourage you to stay updated on our website. We're on Twitter, Facebook. So all these updates are constantly going up on our social media. So as Khalid said, we're hoping to continue this across cities in Canada as the opportunities become available. In terms of virtual programming, we have a few coming up. We have a few important iftars coming up with politicians in the city. I know we have one with Minister Ahmed Hussein. Can you tell us a little bit, Khalid? I know you're aware a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Minister Hussein is actually going to have a virtual iftar this time, and this term became very loose, and basically spend some time with the community, and he wanted to share basically insights on the new budget that the government proposed. So we're going to have a discussion, and we've invited the rest of the Muslim caucus also to share that virtual iftar together. It's going to be tomorrow at 6:30 here on this YouTube channel. At 6:30 p.m.
That's Eastern Standard Time.
Eastern Standard
Okay,
Time,
so
correct, yeah.
that's for everybody across Canada. Join us tomorrow 6:30 on MacNet, our YouTube channel. We also have an event coming up with across on the west side with Jason Kenney.
Yes.
So all of these events again are online. So we encourage you to really participate, engage. We know that it's another pandemic Ramadan, but we are really working to bring a lot into your lives through this Ramadan. We also have the legacy of entrepreneurship in Islam. We have an event coming up on Thursday, and that will also be an iftar featuring Muslim entrepreneurs across Canada and their experiences. And then we have regular programming that's happening, our pre-iftar programming. So connect onto Facebook, and it will be half an hour local time before your iftar time. We have the children's programming daily as well, family programming, and the Mac Youth Show on Friday night. So please, there's a lot happening, whichever member of your family kind of relates to. With that, I'll also a reminder around donations. So we really appreciate our scholars contributing their time, our volunteers really putting a lot of effort during these weeks to really bring a lot of meaningful programming, and through the year really. And we encourage you to donate. That is macnet.ca/donate. And finally, we'll close, inshallah.
So with the donate as well, also we have a special link to Zakat. If you would like to pay Zakat al-Mar or Zakat al-Fitr, macnet.ca/zakat, Z-A-K-A-T. And you will be able to direct your money to your Zakat, inshallah.
And I think that brings us to the close of tonight's program. Please join us again here, inshallah. Next Tuesday, we will be back with another exciting program with topics relating to the Islamic worldview and tying back to the whole one ummah concept that we really are trying to live through this Ramadan. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
What do you think about when you think of MAC, the Muslim Association of Canada? Do you think of an organization with national reach and local presence? A diverse institution with over 22 full and part-time schools, 20 centers and 13 chapters? Do you think of 25 years worth of educational excellence in the making? Do you think of projects that have served thousands and positively affected the lives of countless more? From Vancouver to Toronto to Montreal and everywhere in between, MAC has been there.
I think the most important contribution that MAC provides to our community and our country is really our mission, our primary mission, which is to build a Muslim community that's balanced, constructive, and integrated, though distinct.
2020, the year everything changed. Over the past year, MAC centers and schools have continued to operate both in person and virtually, completing school curricula and offering essential services. Over the past year, MAC has continued to care for the well-being of Canadians, engaging volunteers and helping those in need across Canada. In the last year, MAC has launched a completely revamped portal, which serves as a hub to connect all its chapters, schools, and programs. Over the past year, despite the pandemic, MAC has brought together tens of thousands of people using live broadcast technologies to celebrate a virtual Eid, coast to coast.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. Bonjour à tous. For starters, I want to thank MAC for putting together this celebration and for making sure no one has to celebrate Eid al-Fitr alone this year.
We are investing in the futures of our community by helping more children succeed and helping our youth to become the leaders of tomorrow.
It doesn't matter what age you are, you're always with MAC. MAC is like a family to me.
Alors la richesse de MAC réside dans tous les services qu'elle offre vraiment pour toute la famille.
Really love MAC. It was a life-changing experience.
As we continue to deliver essential programs, educational initiatives, and outreach in communities across Canada, this Ramadan, be part of this journey. Please donate generously. Your gift really does make an impact on your community, your country. MAC. Make change.